In the inbox late night, glowing screens see the light. Do-do-do, email, everything feels alright.
The biggest miss that I see is just, as humans, we want to be told a story that also inspires us to buy. And I think purchasing is emotional. Not enough brands kind of weave a good story with a drive towards like thoughtful, intentional cross-selling and upselling. The best cross-sell that I've ever done is, it's kind of like, you know, that meme where it's like simple and straightforward guy and then like super like smart and sophisticated and then goes back to basics. That's kind of what I see with email on the brand side. So many brands just send an email to send an email. And then you're like, would I even open this?
It's the world's best email and retention podcast, and I'm your host, Jordan Gordon. We are a member of the DTC network of podcasts and the philosophical home of the Pilot House email and customer retention team. Today, I have to introduce to you Eli Weiss, the VP of Retention Advocacy at Yotpo. And we're going to have a discussion about a wide number of things. How are you, Eli?
I am great. I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
I wonder if we, just to start this whole thing out, if you could just tell us what brought you to where you are now and where you're taking Yotpo now that you're there.
So a bit of a funny background. I guess in the last few years, I've spoken to probably a couple hundred of e-com folks, and it feels like there's a lot of us with like non-traditional backgrounds. It's not like e-com is a bunch of HBS students, so there are definitely a fair share of kind of like degenerates that end up in e-com, for better for worse. I think for me at least, grew up Orthodox Jewish, number 2 of 10. Traveled most of my 20s, never graduated high school, did my GD in my early 20s, had like a couple million points and miles and saw like 20 something countries in my early 20s. So had no idea what I wanted to do. And ecom was kind of the only place where I can just stumble into. And if I'm good enough at the work, that's all that'll count. First job I've ever had was at a luggage startup. The first like ecom job, I did a bunch of odd jobs before that. Very, very, very interesting brand, Kickstarter brand, raised a bunch of money, spent a bunch of money, raised some more, burnt some more. A team of 17 ended up being just myself and the CEO. So really, right, my real life MBA touched a lot of parts of the business, ran some Amazon ads, some Facebook ads, ops and logistics to 64 different countries, customer service in the weeds, writing the emails. Funny enough, we were using Yotpo way back. This is like 2015. WordPress, WooCommerce site, a bunch of MailChimp emails. So this is early days before the Klaviyo come up. Spent a couple of years there, started a startup that failed, ended up jumping into a company called Nugs, which was then called Simulate, as a CX lead, or as just a CX associate actually. Was there for a couple of weeks. Somehow got pulled into Olipop, which is a longer story for a different time. Number 16 at Olipop, leading director of customer experience, was there for 2 years, went from 16 employees to 75, from a couple of million to 75 million, and really they'll probably do like 500 million this year. So really saw early days of Olipop as an omni-channel direct-to-consumer brand, like with a ton of retail, but also direct-to-consumer. And then got pulled into Jones Road Beauty, which was a friend of mine, was there again, saw that business go from a couple of million to 120 plus, leading customer experience and retention. Started a newsletter picked up, midlife crisis, ended up at a SaaS company I'd previously hated, churned Yotpo twice, deleted tweets when I took the job, and it's been a phenomenal, crazy ride since then. I have a very amorphous, blurry title, do a bunch of stuff. My job changes every couple of weeks based on what I think is the most value for the company. So I get to really jump around between marketing and community and product marketing. Like there's just so many fun parts of the business that I get to mess around with. And I am the ideal customer profile. Like I'm the person they're trying to sell to. So I have a ton of that. And my rule is I don't drink the Kool-Aid. So I will always be extremely, extremely honest about my thoughts and say when I think something's terrible. And I've been like the pessimist on the inside. So that's my Very quick, like 60-second, 2-minute spiel?
It was a lot. It was
Yeah, it's a
certainly
lot.
a lot.
Imagine how I feel.
Yeah. I mean, there's some stuff in there. First, early on, you made this, comment about e-com. All kinds of people end up in e-com. The interesting thing about e-commerce is it's pure merit. There's no like, someone, stumbled through this school because, his dad, whatever. There's none of that. You're just surrounded by people who are really smart, really sharp, really driven. And yeah, that's one of the things I've always loved about it. And I've interacted with people who work in these regulated industries, and it just, the whole thing seems like such a bummer, basically. So that's nice to
it's
see.
more fun.
Yeah. So you are with Yotpo now. Interesting. Your introduction is I would say unique. I mean, I got in touch with you because we have clients who use Yotpo. So, I wonder if you can just shift a little bit to kind of, more specifically what you're doing with Yotpo right now, what Yotpo's doing, what you're doing with Yotpo.
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, Yotpo has been around for a very long time, probably like 14-ish years, starting as a reviews company. Yotpo has kind of built a phenomenal business, but also a business that was sometimes in the spreadsheets. You think about the space, the review space, right? You think of Power Reviews, Bazaar Voice, all those big guns charging thousands of dollars a month or what have you. Yotpo comes in with a more sustainable and cheaper cost. As they continue to grow, raise money, they kind of increase the cost. It's a small TAM, a separate, larger conversation. And then you kind of get to a space where Yotpo is expensive and people don't love that. And you have players that are coming in and charging $14, $15 for reviews, commoditization, not enough improvement for whatever reason. Yotpo has kind of gone through it a little bit. As Yotpo continues to evolve, they acquire Swell in kind of the mid maybe it's 2018. Acquire Swell, acquire SMS Bump, which was a very large provider based in Bulgaria. And then the last couple of years, Yotpo has started a email tool as well. It's probably 2 and a bit years old, with the fastest growing tool at Yotpo. But again, kind of like going for this overall platform approach. I think for me, at least, sitting on the outside, Yotpo is known for one, maybe two things. And it's always interesting being known as a reviews provider, maybe even an expensive reviews provider, and best in class and loyalty, to now like, who are you to start building in the email space? And it's interesting to me, at least, Yotpo has a lot of knowledge in Shopify and has built in Shopify for a while. And I think the humility piece was something that has been refreshing to see, is like, okay, you've been in ecom for 14 years building, but email and SMS is, SMS a couple of years old, email is fairly new for Yotpo. So coming in with a lot of humility that it's not always, we're not always going to be the best option, but we're another option. And for some brands, we're the best option. So I think that's been like an interesting evolution. People aren't necessarily looking for like the cheapest tool, and maybe the cheapest is not always the best option when you're thinking about your ESP. But taking a step back, I think for me, at least, my role was, how can I take all the things I've learned being on the outside looking in and help Yotpo evolve as a company, going from this 1.0 incredible, $150 million ARR business to a 2.0, which I think is a Yotpo that's closer to the market, a Yotpo that deeply understands and values customer sentiment, even if it's not, even if it's prospect sentiment, a Yotpo that listens and evolves based on feedback. And I think that's the thing that made me midlife crisis from a 9-figure profitable, beloved brand into a brand that people don't like. I will say, as a marketer, the inspiration for me is when there's a massive delta between perception and reality. And for me, that was that. Like I came in expecting, long story short, I connected with the CEO, we got in a call, and within 30 seconds, every one of my expectations was just destroyed. He wasn't the kind of person I thought I would meet. The employees, the product wasn't what I expected. And that, as a marketer, feels like a massive opportunity, the gap between perception and reality. And I said, what can we do to bring perception closer to reality?
Yeah, I mean, the one comment I'll make here, I've worked in SaaS certainly too in my years, and you can have the situation where you are kind of like Frankensteining. You get a bunch of different products, and it's clunky, but if you got a bunch of good product guys and a bunch of good devs, like next thing you know, it's ripping, right? It's ripping and growing. So I certainly understand the path you guys are on, and wish you the most with that. How about your newsletter? I hear that you are trying to build the future of customer retention.
I mean, so funny enough, my last couple of years in ecom has been weird. I'll tell you why. I think I'm extremely introverted. My favorite place in my house is this office. My favorite place in this office is the corner. I just deeply enjoy alone time. And it's weird for somebody that deeply enjoys alone time to have like a personal brand and be sharing learnings and all that. And I think what I've learned early in my career is I spent so many years at this luggage company doing what I felt was great work. And then when I come to the job market, I couldn't even get an interview. Even as a CX associate, after 6-7 years of experience, I couldn't even get an interview, not at Away, not at Allbirds, not at any of these companies. And what I realized is I didn't have that D2C fancy brand. I didn't have that Harvard or whatever school on my resume. I had none of that. I just had one job that I kind of like pushed my hardest at, and that didn't matter. And I started sharing on social because I didn't want to network. And I was told networking was the only way. And I said, what if I bring the network to me? And coincidentally, 2019, and then going straight into COVID, it was not a bad time to be building on social. I had spent so much time over 2021 and 2022 being approached, folks that have seen me on social or that have seen my work at Olipop or seen my work going into Jones and said like, hey, can we hop on a consulting call? And it got to a point where, yes, I can charge for the consulting, but it took so much out of me. Getting on a call even for 30, 60 minutes was like whatever I was going to get paid, it was just a lot for me. And I said, what if I can sit in a corner and write about things that I'm fascinated by, that I've done the work on, and share that with the world? And it started as a hobby and very, very quickly became monetized, and got to work with so many of the vendors that I've been working super closely with, connections that I've built. It's been 3 years. I don't think I've done much at all of kind of like outbounding and SDRs, none of that to get sponsors. It's all people that I know. There's no team. It's just me. I write the newsletter. I edit the newsletter. I write the contract. I send the contract with DocuSign. I send the invoice. I collect the invoice. It's all me. It's a weekend job that I do and love. It's been 3 years. I think I've skipped maybe 3 weeks in 3 years. It's something that I started as like when it's not fun anymore, I'll stop. And I did the same thing with a podcast. I said, like, I'll start a podcast. When it's not fun, I'll stop. And I did 3 seasons of that and it wasn't fun. So I stopped. And the newsletter is the same way. If it gets to a point where it's like no longer fun, I'll stop. But it's been so much fun for me up until now, where I get to sit now, even more so, where I get to sit on the Yuppo side, but also consistently connect with brands, either as a one-off consulting or as kind of like customers of Yuppo. Listen to what they're struggling with. For example, like this week, I wrote about like the obsession with getting more customers from order number 1 to order number 2 that aren't naturally moving there. So like brands can spend, every person I speak to on the retention side says, I just realized that like 40% of my customers are buying twice, but there are 60% of my customers that are only buying once. Do you know how much money that is? I'm like, yeah, I know how much money that is, but there's a reason. 40% and the space you're in is super high. So the pushing you're going to do to get an extra 1% to order number 2, you're much, much better off taking more of those 2-time customers and increase their LTV or like increase their AOV. Like they're much quicker wins. So like that's a topic that I think about, topic that I talk to brands about all the time. And that's like, I can write about that. And it's, like a really fun and side hustle that's put my wife through med school. So
what a gent. So look, I'd love to pull on that thread. This is what we do. My team at Pilot House, we spend our time, at base driving a second purchase. If you had to really, boil it down, we drive that second purchase. But then beyond that, it's like, yeah, how do you think about the LTV? How do you think about the relationship that builds the LTV? How do you, tactically optimize, an email build that it's set up? So, but you got to go somewhere with it. So, maybe you want to just talk about how you think about optimizing an email channel that's already set up?
The biggest miss that I see is just lack of flows. I think so many brands are just living on a campaign energy and living on just like, let's send another campaign. And even on the agency side, I just find that like for an agency, you need to show return on what they're spending. And the easiest is just to do a quick win. Spending a couple of weeks to get together a flow is just a lot of work. But I think like campaigns, like you'll send 2 campaigns a week, but the flows are making money while you're sleeping. And I think about flows as kind of like somebody walking into a Nordstrom, and it's either you can just kind of get overwhelmed by seeing all the products you can buy, or a personal shopper that says, hey, are you looking for anything specific, and kind of walks you right to where you are. And will you find the coat anyway? Maybe. But is it so much easier when somebody's guiding you through that journey? Yes. I think that flows are kind of like the number one slept on. I've seen brands day in and day out that they don't have a post-purchase flow. They don't have any sort of cross-sell going on. I mean, it's like pretty basic. And then I think the other piece that I've seen, just like a massive, massive disconnect, is storytelling. I think people think that it's either direct response or storytelling, right? It's like either buy my stuff now, or it's fluffy branding, kind of like beautiful editorial photos. And I think that's just it's like, it's not a human approach to things. Like, I think as humans, we want to be told a story that also inspires us to buy. And I think purchasing is emotional. And I think not enough brands kind of weave a good story with a drive towards like thoughtful, intentional cross-selling and upselling. The best cross-sell that I've ever done is you buy something from a brand, you love the brand, you love the experience, and you buy something again. This isn't rocket science, but I think we're so focused on squeezing the most out of a customer that it just gets to a point where it's just like, wait, did they buy one? Let's like flash something post-purchase where they can buy 10 more with like a 50% discount. Like, we're so over-engineering e-com that we often miss that.
So you were talking about, we just need more flows. And interestingly, like we here at Pilot House, we're a channel. There's other channels, and like we're really forced to provide affordable value, because what happens is someone comes, they get Meta, Google, orders to the moon, costs a lot, right? Well, okay, if we're gonna pop email and retention in there, our kind of retainer cost, our incentive, everything that goes into the overall cost, which affects the overall cost of basically the agency cost divided by Shopify revenue, right? So we want to go in there with the best effective revenue share, the best ROI. And the way we're doing that this year is we've launched something, everybody out there, we've launched something called multi-channel flow focus management. It's for multiple channel clients. But basically go in there with that low retainer and send half as many campaigns, and just build an automation stack like on steroids, and just flood the inbox after intent. And also you were teasing there, like that person, in Nordstrom bringing you to the right spot to get the coat. And like for me, absolutely. And just use some recommendations after someone makes a purchase. Just use the recommendations. You don't need to really go too crazy at first. You can then, once you've got recommendations, you can say, okay, well, this is the benchmark. Now I can try to get cute. I can try to say, you bought this. Here's the thing that you want next. It's got to beat the recommendations, or the machine learning wins. And ultimately, to improve discovery, especially if someone's got a really big catalog, right? Like, how do you know that that you're directing them to the right stuff, that they're finding the right stuff? And I really see email as this way, especially pre-purchase, which exists as well, to improve discovery and make sure you're inserting them into the right part of the catalog. That's kind of interesting.
It is interesting. I think what's also funny to me is that a lot of the brands I speak to think that the only way they can do that is with a super sophisticated CDP that costs, a couple $1,000s a month. And I think the flaw there is that you have so much customer data without a fancy CDP that there's no excuse to in personalization. I mean, whether it's the reviews they left, whether it's the post-purchase survey, whether it's the product they bought, like there's so much guidance that you have based on other customer behavior that you don't need a fancy CDP for a couple grand a month to do that. Whether or not you're using like a Yuppo platform where you can like plug in loyalty reviews, et cetera, even without that, assuming you're using a completely different provider and you never heard of Yuppo, I think there's so much data from just basket analysis from first, when people purchase order number one, what do they most likely purchase number two? Instead of trying to push people towards what you think is the best way to artificially grow somebody's basket, just push them to where they'd be going anyway. It's something I talk about often. It's like, it's much, much easier to push behavior where it's going versus trying to create net new behaviors. So just push the existing behavior. And I think most brands try to do too much. And by doing too much, they often end up with nothing.
Email less is because email it's already this really kind of janky 50-year-old protocol. So just less is
Yes.
more. Right?
Yes.
Working on the sender side, I'd love your insights on where you see kind of email, and you know what? We'll just say email and SMS. We'll just say outbound. Where you see email and SMS like going in the next, where's it going to be in 2025, and where's it going to be in 2035? I'd love to get that because you're there in the tool building.
Yeah. I mean, I think without speaking too much to it, because there are definitely people smarter than me on deliverability, on understanding kind of like TCPA stuff. I think what's, if I were to talk as like a non-Yotpo exec and as somebody that's just sitting on both sides of the table without talking as Yotpo for a second, I think what you're seeing is across every part of this is that senders are realizing that this isn't the way this is going to continue going. And Florida TCPA is step one of 25 other steps. And I think Google and Yahoo making those changes on the inbox is step one. I think Apple kind of now just literally bricking emails that they don't enjoy. I mean, like spam filters have gotten better. I mean, everything is leading towards signal over noise. And for some reason, as brand folks see that, they say they don't change their behavior because they're looking at the pool and saying, look, everyone else is doing that. If JCPenney's sending 3 emails a day, why shouldn't I? Right? Like if these large brands are sending 3 emails a day and it's obviously doing well because they're so big and they're obviously so smart and they're sending 3 emails a day, I may as well do the same. And it's something that I've seen often where it's kind of like, that meme where it's like kind of like simple and straightforward guy and then like super, super, super like smart and sophisticated and then goes back to basics. That's kind of what I see with email on the brand side is like people start from just, let's send a lot of emails because it's obvious that works. And then they get to a point where they're like, oh shit, like my deliverability is tanking or my open rates are falling or like my, my unsubscribes are going up and they go to like, oh, then we need to personalize. And it's just like a cycle that goes up and down where you just like send more emails to like, oh shit, this isn't working long-term to back up to send more emails. And it's a cycle, but if we don't do it, Google's going to do it for us. And I think over the next 10 years, you're just going to see like, I think email will still be around. I think SMS will continue kind of getting hammered by TCPA being, it seems like politicians have their free reign on just sending whatever they want. But in general, it's a channel that's being abused. If you've signed up for a brand, and I know you certainly have, but if any of the listeners have signed up for a brand, on average, you're getting multiple messages a day. I mean, that's insane. That's crazy.
I often think about this too. This, I follow people who, at least doing an email a day, right? Some brands do an email a day. And, when I was coming up, I worked at a brand where they gave me 1 campaign a week. And actually that's when I got into automations because it was like, long time ago, a designer was a very, designers are great. I'm not trashing designers at all, but it's easier to find a designer than it used to be. It's always hard to find a good designer. But anyway, they said, look, here's the designer. He's designing the site. We're a startup. You get 1 email a week, right? So I would take those emails and I would turn them into automations. And that's kind of how I started. But then I see people who do an email a day. We don't do an email a day for our clients. And if they wanted us to, we would. But generally we'll do up to 3 a week. I mean, you get diminishing returns. What I'm curious about, though, is, and this is a very specific technical question, you might not know the answer, but to what degree does having a static IP rather than a pooled IP improve your chances of getting good inboxing with that 1 email a day when your frequency just goes like this?
I think it really, 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 deliverability is a very complex topic. And I think that as much as, our deliverability person spent a bunch of years at a very large competitor and has very deep knowledge in deliverability and still, we'll have a deliverability dashboard that shows you all of that. And still with all of that, it's so many things that comprise of great deliverability that I think it's sometimes yes, sometimes not. But I do think in general, what's missing is just the intentionality of deeply understanding why a customer would be interested in an email. I think so many brands just send an email to send an email. And then you're like, would I even open this? Like,
I was just in an audit yesterday, and I said, because I was looking at their metrics and they were really, really bad, and I said, your email, there has to be an email, a reason for your recipient to receive the email, not a reason for you to send it, right? That's where we have to find that reason. And so, like, yeah, my background is not, it's certainly not an email a day. And look, when we were doing our research in 2024, which we've reacted to, and we're doing we were already very automation focused. Now we're doing it even more, because I agree with what you just said. Like, all we just saw from Gmail, Yahoo was a shot over the bow. That's all it was, right? I mean, they control the inbox, and what we saw specifically, and I'd love to know if you have any color you could add to this. We split our audience up into a kind of a 3x3 grid. You got recent, stale engaged, stale unengaged. You got prospect, first time, and repeat. And you get this kind of little grid, and everybody's in only one place. And we just use that to understand what's going on. And we just saw this like apocalypse in the stale unengaged group, right? And we had to like basically for this year's segmentation, go and kind of start the whole thing from scratch. To do something with that audience. And so here's another technical question, which you may or may not know the answer to, and it's fine. But although I'm also happy to have your deliverability guy on too. Happily, I will quiz him for 2 hours. But I wonder if you just can maybe tell me if you think like some people still inbox in those later, let's say those late dated addresses, right, that aren't engaging. I still see some engagement from those segments. And do you think that it's frequency of engagement? Because everybody's segmentation, the default is recency. When was the last time they engaged? I never do an audit and I see someone who's saying where the segmentation is based on how often they engage.
I love this question. I think RFM is a model that's so widely spoken about, but not used nearly enough. Funny enough, it's something we're kicking off in beta in the next couple of weeks. An RFM dashboard that will easily be able to create RFM segments and push it into email, which I think should be really, really interesting, because I tend to agree recency is just like the number one thing people look at, but I think frequency and monetary is something that should be looked at just as equally. Is like what are the behaviors saying, not just, for example, if somebody opens up emails all the time but never purchases versus somebody that opens up every third email but places a $150 purchase, that's something to look at as well, especially if it's on like every third week on a Tuesday. So I think there are just a lot of behaviors that should drive a basic understanding of like, is this the right person to send a promotional email versus a new product launch email versus something to the community? And yes, Lauren is our deliverability expert, and I will happily send her your way because she is much wiser than me on the technicals. But yes, I think in general, most marketers on the email side are somewhat juvenile just because the tools they have aren't super sophisticated.
It's interesting because, like, also I think if I was a product manager for one of these senders, and I was a product manager for email before, so I completely understand the chair, I would be thinking to myself, look, do I want to be putting a whole bunch of time into this segmentation interface when I know that our AI guy over there is just going to kind of barrel over it, within the next 18 months? Probably not. So I think that there's going to be this kind of really unholy valley where the tools are kind of just falling apart and no one's working on them, but we haven't quite reached the point where we're doing it automatically. And this is maybe something that you wouldn't be able to comment on, but on the sender side, your colleagues, your competitors, how do you feel? Where do you think they are or you are in automating that portion and just getting rid of the segmentation interface?
I will say in the next 2 to 3 years, I can see a formidable change in the way we think about email sending. I will say that I think the idea of somebody physically going in and clicking on segments will be gone in the next few years is my take. I think when you have an interface when you have like a CDP that is collecting all the information in one place, I actually think like the smart CDP, like Triple Whale launched a smart CDP. I think, obviously Yotpo is built on a CDP that isn't external facing today, but we obviously house all the customer data on profiles. And I think there's a lot of room there to kind of build something that says, okay, we have 2 million customers on this list. We know everything from RFM to whatever other analyses we build over the years. I need to drive, this is my mission for the month in terms of revenue. My max is, kind of like an interface that you would talk to ChatGPT, say my max is sending 3 emails a day, but if I don't see unsubscribe increasing past X, feel free to continue sending and just have like an agent that does all the work for you. You just need to approve the copy, approve the design, etc. And you're seeing this being built in multiple different places. So, Ripple AI is a great tool that's building like the design part here, where you can just say like, I want this thing with this style, create me an email. So that's like super cool. That's on the design side. I think you're seeing like the segmentation piece. There are a bunch, Yotpo has Tailor, which is like an AI kind of like Ask Tailor, where you can say, hey, help me find the segment for X, Y, and Z, and it'll pull that for you based on engagement, etc. So, this is in the midst of being built. I think kind of like it's coming faster for growth, right? You're already seeing with Meta and Google, you kind of just hands off, just set your goals and let it run. So yeah, I think that, to be honest, I think that'll be a net positive for customers, because we all know that realistically, if you knew as a brand that instead of sending 5 emails, just send 1 email with this exact topic at this time, selling this product, and the customer will buy, you're obviously going to save the money and not send the 4 other emails. So I think it's just a matter of like, if we have the information, and we kind of do, or we have more information than we think we have in terms of better understanding what will work and what won't. I think we're heading there.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you for that. Quick follow on that before the next hot question. Like, do you feel that it's going to be similar, like we were discussing with Meta and Google, where you fire it up and it actually just sends to a large amount of the audience and starts learning, and then we'll figure out the appropriate frequency, of sending to drive the appropriate frequency of engagement, to inbox with Gmail? Is it going to be, you start with a spray and pray and optimize? Like, do you think how that's going to work? Each individual account? Or do you think that there's going to be, this is really specific, I'm sorry, there's like a master that understands, oh, this is how Gmail works, and it's just you're not going to need to warm up? Because I could see one of the most annoying things when we fire up, sorry, I shouldn't speak about this, there's other channels. One of the things I would imagine is annoying is you fire it up and it takes like a month or so, and you're just super inefficient for a month. And in our case, you're pissing off Gmail for a month. So this super specific question, but how do you think that warm-up period works? How does warm-up work now?
I think, you probably would need to better understand how much customer information you have on purchasing behavior so far, and better understanding benchmarks from other brands. I think there's so much you can learn with keeping the kind of data privacy. I think there's so much you can learn from other brands and the way other brands play to drive a model that better understands like what works based on what's worked for other brands and what's worked for other inboxes. But I think it's more on purchasing behavior, right? It's like understanding. It should be faster than, again, this is just me shooting in the dark, but I think it should be faster than Google and Meta, just because we understand pretty quickly what emails work and what types of emails work and what customer base and what purchasing frequency looks like. For example, if customers are generally buying every 25 days, does an email sending, if you send an email at 22 days, will that magically, bring up that repurchase date? Possibly. And that's a pretty easy thing to quickly test, which I don't think brands do often enough, right? They look at purchasing behavior, they say customers on average buy every 25 days, and they start hammering them at day 4 instead of starting the other way and saying like, okay, if a customer's on average let's try at day 18, let's try to bring it up a couple of days. And also better understanding the product. So I think Repeat, which recently sold, like they were early in the days of kind of like the Klaviyo predictive repurchase and all that, like better understanding, is it deodorant that kind of lasts for 30 days? Is it toothpaste that lasts for 45? Like, especially with CPG and replenishables, better understanding the product and the actual behavior. I think we sell products thinking they're just products, not realizing there's a consumer on the other side. So I think there's that.
That's really interesting. A completely different angle on the automating of email. Like so This is something I think might happen. I don't know. Who knows what's going to end up the norm, and what's going to be the norm is the thing that people interact with the most, right? But I wonder if, in fact, the beautifully designed template is not the direction it goes. It actually goes, hey, I'm your automated assistant. It looks like you just bought this, and this is probably what you need next. And we actually just switch to text, which would be this fundamental, crazy on its head shift. And I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in general, shopping for the longest time, the catalog days, it's always been visual. I think that being said, I guess like pre-online, you just walk through a market and you bought something. And then once things were online, there were a lot of catalogs. So I think photos have been kind of the thing. But we have seen on the SMS side, SMS for some brands does much better than MMS, especially considering cost. So I think there's a point where an email is great, I guess, depending on how much visualization you need on the product. So depending on product vertical, and depending, is it a first time customer versus a recurring customer? I think for some brands, if you're selling dresses online, it's going to be hard to just send like a plain text email that describes the dress without a visualization. But I do think for a lot of brands that are testing plain text email, I think when you test it and don't abuse it, it does super well. It's something I've seen across a lot of brands. So I think we're heading towards simplicity. I don't know it'll be everyone and everything, but I think it's an interesting point for sure.
Now, my last question on this whole automation thing, which really wraps it up into like okay, so what, right? And what I'm curious, and this is, who knows? I just want to know what your opinion is on this, because I think about it all the time. Who's going to win in this? So we talked about basically Gmail, Yahoo, all these, and any inbox provider that has any sophistication becoming incredibly selective, right? I'll tell you what, my inbox, there's just tons of stuff in there I don't want. And it's like, and I'm going to sit down for an hour and very carefully unsubscribe. I don't do that. I'm just like a lazy inbox guy. So there's a bunch of stuff in there I don't want. And so they're paying the cost of transmission. They're transmitting all that and they don't like it. So they become more selective. Okay, well, who wins? Is it like Amazon because they've got the best AI? You know what I mean? So they hit the engagement and frequency and keywords the best to get in that inbox? Or is it, the little guy, because the SMTP protocol gets so democratized, right? That it actually, there's so much more inboxing placement that it's a net negative for Amazon. And not just Amazon, you know what I mean? The big players.
I think it's $1 million question, but I think the one biggest hope for me is that the customer wins. I hope the customers get a better slew of information that isn't just slop and chaos. And I do think that small brands will always have the ability to have these real relationships with their customers that drive real value. If you get an email from a brand that you feel like you're somewhat connected to, you're just much more likely to open the emails. I think in general, some of the smaller brands that have deep communities see like 60-70% open rate versus some of the larger kind of just sloppy strategies see 35, maybe 40% open rate, and that continue to drop. I think you'll see like more in-app, in-shopping, kind of like conversion pushing chat. You'll see kind of a little bit more of those AIs that help you shop on the website. I think, for example, there's no reason why every single customer always sees the same experience when they jump on a website. Given so much information about them, you can customize creatively, like for Mott's doing this, Black Rose doing this, kind of like unique storefronts based on customers. And I think if that's the case, like, yes, you should kind of have like a individualized experience. The only thing that's blocking that is the overhead to do that. But I think we'll probably be there, not to the extent that some people think. I don't think we'll have like an entirely unique shopping experience for every user. The same way, everyone walks into the same Nordstrom and figures out what they need. I don't know that. I think online will be more like retail and not less. But it's a good point, and it'll be an interesting couple of years.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Let's say you were a young email professional. I mean, I'm old. I'm going to keep crushing targets until I'm playing lawn bowling. You know what I mean? But let's say you're a young email professional and you're listening to the world's best email and retention podcast. Where would you start to angle your career to take advantage of all of these changes?
I think AI is like the buzziest, but also the most impactful place. I think if you're not focusing on ways that you can cut your workload, you're probably sleeping. I think what you're going to see over the next couple of years is people will demand a lot more from a retention marketer than they did 5 years ago. I think kind of like what you saw on the growth side is that growth marketers also became strategists and also became, creative strategists, et cetera, need to better understand how to use ChatGPT to write copy, et cetera. I think you'll see more of that as people will hire somebody on retention, expect them to be much more holistic than they were, kind of just pressing keys all day. So I think it'll, kind of like AI, like everything else, AI will accelerate a lot of the work people are doing and make it much easier. And then the question is like, what can you do to leverage that AI? And then what can you do with the extra time you have in the day to be much more impactful? But I'd say like leaning on AI to help you kind of get more done with less time, and you'll become like a 10x retention marketer.
Yeah. On the strategy comment you made, creative is an expression of strategy. And so it is exciting for many of us to be able to move into this higher plane and just kind of think on a much higher level and think about like, what do people like? That's what I like thinking about. What do people like? And also, of course, because I'm a marketer, how can I kindly trick them into thinking about the things that I'm pretty sure they like? You know what I mean? Okay, look, we discussed so much email, Eli. Thank you very much. This is the world's best email and retention podcast. Of course, retention is not only email. Retention is a methodology. Email is a tool. The rest of the suite. Is there anything you want to say about the rest of the Yotpo suite? For the audience, because you do a lot more.
Yeah, I think less on Yotpo. I'm not a Yotpo salesperson. I think for me at least, what's important to me is people use more of the data they already have. I think so much of marketing is lazy right now. It's just slop. It's just throwing things at the wall. And I think people have the ability to be creative with information they already have. And users and customers and potential customers just really appreciate when there's some sort of like, just try. So I encourage people to just look at information they already have, whether it's from a loyalty program or reviews, and just make sure you try to leverage that in the marketing you do, whether it's the ads you run, whether it's the emails you send, the texts you send. Best in class is important, but you can use best in class and still try to learn from your customers to better understand what they're looking for.
Awesome. Yeah. And ultimately, use all that to help you to make the email program that you would want to be on, because that's the best email program. And you know what? I would love to speak with your deliverability manager. What was her name?
Anytime. Lauren.
Oh my goodness. I would love to have her on here, and I'd want to talk about Apple Privacy Opens. So thank you very much. It was great having you. And perhaps I'll have you on again soon. If you ever have a big launch or something like that, just feel free to give me a call, okay?
Sounds good. Shoot me an email and I will loop in Lauren, and I think she'll be a super exciting person to talk to.
Awesome. Great. Entrepreneurs, executives, and spammers, have fun spamming.
In the inbox late night, glowing screens see the light. Email, everything feels alright.
Hey entrepreneurs and spammers, remember, you can't scale without email, and the cheapest customer to acquire is the customer you already have. So please subscribe to the world's best email and retention podcast and learn how to make low-cost revenue a big part of your digital ecosystem.